America wears two faces. One is polished, confident, and endlessly familiar. The highways that stretch beyond the horizon, the neon-lit diners, the flags fluttering in the wind. But the other face, the one hidden in the folds of history and in the cracks of the land, tells a different story. It is the face you are not meant to see, the face that watches from forgotten. Airfields, silent forests, and cold waters that never give back what they take. Beneath the ordinary lies a country that has never been ordinary at all. There are places in the United States where compasses fail without warning, where people vanish without leaving footprints, and where whispers rise from the ground as though the earth itself remembers secrets too dark for daylight. There are flights that take off but never land. Bases that do not exist on any map yet are spoken about in hushed voices, and men who walk through customs with documents from countries that were never on this earth. It is a silence so carefully maintained that it feels almost alive, like something watching from behind the curtain of our reality. And that silence has a cost. Families waiting for loved ones who never return. Old letters, photographs, and empty uniforms preserved like relics of a truth that no authority will acknowledge. People still gathering on anniversaries of events that never officially happened, lighting candles for those erased from history. Each unanswered question is not just an accident or coincidence, it is a fracture in reality, a reminder that the United States, for all its vastness and familiarity, hides mysteries that do not just resist explanation, but actively defy it. Tonight, you and I will walk into that fracture together. But be warned, once you step through, you may never see America the same way again. Because these are not just stories to be consumed. Not just legends whispered in roadside bars or dug up on fringe websites. These are events with evidence, witnesses, and scars left behind. Events that should not be real but are. So turn off the lights. Put on your headphones. Close your door and let the outside world fade. Because what follows demands your full attention. This is not a journey through folklore. It is a descent into the places where the known world collapses. Places where flights vanish mid-air without a signal, where a low hum vibrates endlessly beneath the desert floor, where a man appears with a passport from a country that never existed, and where signals rise from deep beneath the water, as if something ancient is waiting for us to reply. America does not reveal these truths willingly. It buries them, silences them, and erases the names of those caught inside. But erasure is not the same as absence. Some traces still remain. And tonight, we follow those traces into the dark. Mystery 1, Flight 739. It began with precision, discipline, and routine, the kind of military order that leaves no room for mistakes. On March 16, 1962, at exactly 8:30 p.m., a Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation lifted off from Travis Air Force Base in California. To those watching from the tarmac, it was just another transport mission heading west, another assignment in a growing conflict that the public barely understood at the time, but to the families who would later wait for news that never came, this was the moment their lives split in two. On board were 93 young American soldiers, 3 South Vietnamese officers, and a handful of crewmen who joked with each other during boarding, men who thought they were heading to Saigon to help build a war effort that had not yet become a national nightmare. Their uniforms were pressed, their orders sealed, their futures unwritten. None of them could have known that the very act of stepping onto that aircraft would erase them not just from life, but from history itself. The flight path was simple. Cross the Pacific, stop in Guam for refueling, then onward to its destination. But somewhere over the open ocean, the plane disappeared. No mayday call, no radar signature breaking apart, no emergency beacon screaming for help. It was as if the super constellation had been swallowed whole by the night sky. For hours, air traffic controllers strained over their consoles, waiting for the flicker of a return signal. Nothing. Silence. At first, the government said little. The families of the soldiers were left pacing in kitchens, staring at silent telephones, imagining the hum of an engine that would never be heard again. Days passed before officials finally released a statement. It was vague, the kind of bureaucratic language that comforts no one, presumed lost at sea. But the Pacific had been searched wide sweeps of water, combed by aircraft and naval vessels, and still not a single scrap of wreckage surfaced. And then came the oil tanker. A ship called the SSTL Lenzen was traveling not far from the projected flight path. Its crew reported seeing a sudden flash bright, violent, and unnatural rip across the sky at almost the exact moment Flight 739 should have been overhead. They radioed it in immediately, certain they had just witnessed a disaster. Yet when questioned, military officials brushed it aside, calling the sighting unrelated. Unrelated to what? A plane that was gone without a trace. The contradiction only deepened the wound. For the families, the silence cut deeper than any official denial. Mothers sat on porches, watching the road as if expecting uniforms to appear at the gate. Children grew up asking why their father's name was not on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington. And when they demanded answers, what they received was not compassion but distance. A memorial was not even erected until 2006. And not by the government, but by a private veterans organization. For nearly 50 years, the missing men had been reduced to shadows, their story whispered in private vigils, rather than etched in the nation's memory. And still, the questions remain. Civilian air controllers in Guam swore they had never been told to expect a military flight that night, something unheard of for an operation of this scale. Radar logs showed nothing. Radio towers heard nothing. Even the emergency beacon, a device designed to survive catastrophe, stayed silent. To aviation experts, it was impossible. To conspiracy theorists, it was proof. Some believe Flight 739 was not bound for Saigon at all, but for a covert mission into Cambodia or Laos territories where American boots were not yet supposed to be. If that is true, then its disappearance may have been deliberately erased to avoid scandal, its soldiers buried not in graves but in silence. Others whisper that the CIA had its hands in the operation, that the timing just months before the Vietnam War escalated was no accident. And then there are those who look past politics and toward the unknown. That flash in the sky, the missing signals, the utter lack of debris, was it sabotage? Or something beyond technology? As we understand it, the Pacific has long been a graveyard of strange vanishings, warships that leave no trace, planes that never reach their destination, radio calls that end mid-sentence. Perhaps Flight 739 simply joined a list of disappearances too vast, too strange, and too persistent to be coincidence. What they left behind was absent 93 young soldiers whose names were never carved in stone, whose story barely grazed textbooks, whose faces only survive in fading photographs on mantles. For their families, every unanswered knock at the door was a reminder that their sons, brothers, and husbands had been taken not just from the earth but from memory itself. And yet, as chilling as it is, Flight 739 was not unique. It was the opening act of something larger, the first page of a hidden chronicle. Because in America's deserts and mesas, far from the open water, there is another place where silence hums, where light flickers against the night sky, and where a door is said to exist, a door no one dares to open. Mystery 2, Dulce's Black Door. The door you are not supposed to find is not made of iron or wood. It is a feeling, first pressure in the ears, a weight on the chest, a note so low you do not hear it as much as you wear it. In northern New Mexico, where the high desert flattens into redstone and the wind carves its name into the mesa face, people call it the hum. It thrums under Archuleta Mesa at odd hours, steady as breath. Then it falters and surges, as if responding to something deep below. You can stand out there on a windless night and swear the ground is thinking. That is where the other stories start. Cattle that refuse to graze near the cliffs, dogs that pull their leashes hard toward the highway, porch lights that flicker in a rhythm no electrician can explain. Some nights the hum swells until coffee cups tremble on kitchen tables. Some nights it falls into silence, and that is somehow worse. Old ranch families talk about columns of white mist rising on windless mornings, vertical as smoke from an unseen chimney. Teenagers tell each other about a blue light that pulses over the mesa and then slides straight down, as if the sky itself were an elevator shaft. A man who'd lived there all his life, hands cracked from 100 winters, said he saw a silver disc lift out of the rock like it had been parked there. He laughed when he said it. The kind of laugh you use when you hope the truth sounds like a joke. The official record is tidy. No unusual seismicity. No verified military installations. No cause for concern. The USGS sheets are plain and blank where people say they should not be. Papers filed under Freedom of Information come back with pages swallowed by black ink, not because anything exists there, they say, but because nothing does. Yet local phone recordings catalog the hum across decades, the same sub-bass saturation, the same standing frequency that creeps into the ribs. When you play the oldest tape beside the newest one, the line barely shifts. Whatever's down there, if anything has a routine. In 1995, a man stepped onto a hotel ballroom stage in Las Vegas and tore a hole in that tidy record. Phil Schneider, nervous, sharp, brittle, wore his wounds in public. Missing fingers, a pale seam of scar vanishing beneath his shirt. He told a room full of people that he had helped build deep underground facilities beneath Dulce as part of continuity of government projects, plasma boring machines, vaporizing rock into glass, tunnels milled smooth as ceramic. He said that in one shaft his crew punctured a cavern they did not map and did not expect. The air went strange, the lights fluttered, and something moved where geology should only sit. According to him, soldiers fired, and nothing worked the way it should. Misfires, dead radios, panic that felt engineered. He said a beam hit him in the chest and burned him clean through. 66 men, he claimed, did not come back. He called it the Dulce Wars, and the room did not breathe. He brought diagrams and document copies, maps that stacked corridors 7 levels deep, coolant systems laced like arteries. He spoke about his father and submarines that were not in the official histories, propulsion experiments that did not fit on public timelines. He talked the way people talk when they know time is shorter than they hoped. 3 months later, he was dead. An extension cord, tight around his neck, ruled a suicide. There was no note, no spiral captured on paper, only a vacant home office and friends who said his evidence physical, heavy, real enough to stack had disappeared. The police report closed. The hum did not. You could file it under delusion and move on, if not for the way other stories gravitate toward the same center. Different people, different years, same diagram and rough outline, multi-level structures bored into rock, sections sealed behind blast doors, the air colder where it should not be. Some say they saw labs, not military bays, glass partitions, silhouettes that never stepped fully into the light. Others talk about ventilation shafts that carried sounds no machine makes. A keening that started and stopped, like an alarm only a few could hear. The most persistent image is the most abstract. A black door, featureless, unadorned, set into a wall that did not flex even when the earth shook. It never opened. It never had to. At least one camera was always pointed at it. The door, some said, hummed on its own. If you draw circles on a map, the mesa, the old weapons labs at Los Alamos, the web of fault lines and volcanic basalt that riddles the region, you get a geometry that feels convenient. The basalt is hard, stable, machinable into tunnels that hide signals as well as they carry them. Caverns exist out here that no daylight has met in 1,000 years. If an agency wanted to bury something where no one would look, they would choose rock like this. If a project needed proximity to scientists who built the first split atom, it would not have to travel far. The present intrudes occasionally in ways that make the past feel less distant. Trail runners report black SUVs beyond any sane line for pavement. Hikers say drones ghost the ridge mat, silent, hovering longer than battery life allows. Barbed wire appears in places satellite images do not list, then vanishes the way snow does. Ranchers still wake to carcasses laid out with clinical cruelty organs missing with surgical precision, not a smear of blood between the body and the dirt. Reports get filed. Officials shrug. Somebody says coyotes. Somebody else says cults. The hum does not say anything at all. Whenever someone pushes for coordinates, the story slides out of reach. There are no signs, no verified schematics, no fence line you can touch and say, here. This is where it starts. The paradox is neat enough to frame. If a thing is never acknowledged, it never has to be denied. You can't FOIA a rumor. You can't subpoena a hum. You can only listen and decide whether the absence of proof is an accident, a policy, or a signal that your definitions are too small. A field researcher once told a story over a cup of gas station coffee. He would spend weeks camping at the base of the mesa, recording the sound that lived under it. On the 4th night, his seismometer skated 2 ticks left for 61 seconds, then returned. He copied the shape of the anomaly into a notebook curved like a C, then a flat line, then a spike. He said he saw that same shape later in a place he swore had nothing to do with Dulce. A screenshot from an airport camera that someone had sent him in confidence. 7 minutes of static, shaped like a C, then a flat line, then a spike, in a corridor outside a hotel room where a man was supposed to be sleeping. Connections like that are not evidence. They are echoes. But echoes are how the mind navigates caves, how we decide where to set the next foot when the flashlight cuts out. Dulce is a cave, even if it is not a cave. It is a story with too much geometry to fold neatly. A place where the map refuses to match the terrain, and the terrain refuses to be ordinary. Either it is the most elaborate mirage the desert has ever projected, layered across decades and reinforced by grief and thrill-seeking, and the human talent for pattern-making, or there is a door under that mesa, watched by a camera that never blinks, wired to projects that never exist, vibrating with a note that tells you nothing and everything at once. Stand out there at dusk, and you understand why people keep talking. The sun drops, the stone goes purple, and a wind comes off the ridge that smells like dust and rain that won't arrive. You feel the hum through your boots and into your knees, and for a heartbeat your name seems wrong in your own mouth, as if you borrowed it from someone else. Then your phone buzzes and you are yourself again, small and busy, with places to be and lights to turn off before bed, but you look back at the mesa as you drive away, and the feeling lingers that somewhere under that rock, a door waits in the dark, not opening, not closing, just measuring time, in its own way. And if there are doors beneath the earth that do not belong on any floor plan, there are also borders in the mind that do not belong on any map. The next fracture does not open in a tunnel. It opens at a bright, ordinary place with polished floors and clocks on the wall, where documents rule and routine reign, until a man steps forward with a passport from a country that has never existed in our world and asks politely to be let through. Mystery 3. The Man from Tord. Airports are temples of routine. You take off your shoes, you present your documents, you answer the same 3 questions with the same rehearsed nods. Thousands of travelers pass through every day, and the system is designed to make them blur into one another. The same lines, the same stamps, the same polite exhaustion. That is why the story of the man from Tord has never faded. Because, amid all that order, he appeared like a crack in the glass, small but impossible to ignore. It was July 1954. The Tokyo airport hummed with its usual choreography of suitcases rolling, announcements echoing, and travelers shuffling through customs. Among them was a man in his mid-40s, dignified, well-dressed in a tailored gray suit. He carried himself with the kind of calm one acquires from years of business travel, no hesitation, no nerves. He spoke fluent French and Japanese, his voice polite, confident, like a man who knew exactly who he was and where he came from. But then came the passport. The officer scanned it once, then again, his brow knitting tighter each time. The leather cover was familiar, the embossed seal official. The visas looked genuine, each stamp perfectly aligned. Yet in bold lettering, the place of origin read, Tord. The officer asked him to clarify. Where? The man blinked in confusion. Tord, he repeated, certain the question was some sort of mistake. Between France and Spain, my country has been there for over 1,000 years. The officers exchanged glances. That space on the map was not Tord, it was Andorra. Andorra existed. Tord did not. The questions deepened. Who was he visiting? What company employed him? Where had he traveled before? Every answer came back precise, consistent, believable. His briefcase contained business, correspondence, contracts stamped with a company letterhead that did not exist in our records but was perfectly normal in his. His checkbook bore the same golden lion insignia, his driver's license too. Nothing looked forged. If this was a deception, it was flawless. They brought out a map and slid it across the desk. Show us, the translator said. Without hesitation, the man pointed directly to where Andorra should be. There. That is my home. And when they told him Andorra existed in its place, he laughed, at first laughed like someone correcting a typo. Then his face changed. He grew pale. His confidence drained. That is impossible, he whispered. My country has existed for centuries. This must be a mistake. For hours they questioned him, and for hours he maintained the same calm bewilderment. His story never cracked. His languages never slipped. His details never contradicted themselves. Eventually, the officials decided the only course was to detain him for the night while they verified what they could. They booked him into a hotel near the airport, placed 2 guards at the door, and locked him inside. The room had no balcony, no window large enough to escape, only a single entrance that never left the guards' sight. And yet, by morning, he was gone. The bed had not been slept in. His passport, his documents, his briefcase, all gone. The guards swore they had seen no one enter or leave. The security cameras, every one of them, glitched into static for exactly 7 minutes during the night, then returned to normal. The man from Torrid had vanished as impossibly as he had arrived. The case was quietly buried, as cases like this often are. No press release, no official statement. The file was tucked away and sealed, until fragments surfaced decades later in interviews, in declassified papers, in the memories of officers who had been there and still swore, late in life, that they had held the passport in their own hands. One retired customs official said, "The strangest thing was how calm he was. He was not lying. He was not panicking. He was certain he was right and we were wrong." What was he? A traveler from a parallel dimension, one so close to ours that only the borders of Europe were different, a time slip, a fold in reality where 2 versions of the world brushed against each other for a single night. Or a more human mystery, a Cold War spy with the most elaborate cover identity ever devised, protected by technology we still can't explain. Skeptics call it urban legend, an invention that grew in the telling. But the details are too sharp, too consistent across the accounts. And then there are the echoes. Every few years a new story emerges of a traveler whose documents name a country that never existed, whose language does not match any known dialect, whose belongings bear symbols historians can only trace to long-dead cultures. Each story ends the same way. Silence, disappearance, no resolution. One Japanese researcher once connected the winged lion insignia to an artifact found in the Iberian Peninsula, an object carved thousands of years ago by a people who left no written record. Coincidence? Maybe. Or a reminder that memory is not confined to human brains alone, that symbols can slip through cracks, carrying with them fragments of worlds we never lived. If the man from Tower truly crossed into our reality, then one question haunts everything else. What happens to those who vanish from this world into another? If someone can step out of their country and into ours, then perhaps the reverse is also true. Which means that not every disappearance is an ending. Some might be translations, and not all of them happen in airports. Some happen on quiet mountain roads, under a pale moon, when 5 young men drive home from a basketball game and never arrive. Mystery 4. The Yuba County 5. It should have been a night to remember for all the right reasons. A basketball game, a road trip with friends, the kind of small adventure that breaks up the monotony of everyday life. On February 24th, 1978, 5 men from Yuba City, California, piled into a Mercury Montego and headed north to Chico for a college basketball game. They were young, between 24 and 32, each of them carrying their own quirks, their own vulnerabilities, and their own shared excitement. The next day, they were scheduled to play in a Special Olympics basketball tournament. They had uniforms laid out. They had practiced hard. They had been buzzing about it for weeks. These were boys who lived for that game. But they never came home. When they did not return the next morning, their families knew something was wrong. These were not men prone to vanishing or shirking responsibilities. One had reminded his mother to wake him up early so he would not miss the tournament. Another had carefully folded his team jersey on his bed before leaving. By dawn, that jersey was still waiting, and the Montego was gone. 3 days later, police found it. The car was abandoned on a lonely dirt road in the Plumas National Forest, 70 miles from Chico, in the opposite direction of home. The area was remote, mountainous, covered in snow. Yet the car itself was not stuck. It had a quarter tank of gas left and, when tested, the engine started without a problem. No flat tires, no damage, no signs of foul play. It was as if the 5 men had simply stepped out, closed the doors, and wandered into the wilderness. For months, the forest was combed by search teams, helicopters, dogs. Nothing. Not a footprint. Not a piece of clothing. The mountains were vast, the snow relentless, and the silence impenetrable. Families clung to hope, but each passing week turned that hope into dread. Then came June, when the snow began to melt. A forest ranger stumbled across a trailer deep in the woods, part of a remote forestry service station. Inside lay the body of Ted Weir, or what remained of him. He had survived for weeks, maybe even 3 months, slowly starving in the cold. His beard had grown thick. His feet were swollen and frostbitten. Around him were empty food cans, stacked neatly, a strange orderliness that only sharpened the horror. But here's what no one could ever explain. The trailer had a working propane heater. Full canisters sat waiting. A storage locker was filled with military rations and warm clothing. None of it had been touched. Ted had wrapped himself in sheets, 8 of them, tucked tightly around his body in the kind of careful style you might expect from a soldier, though none of the men had military training. And yet, despite food and heat within reach, he wasted away until his body gave out. Not far from the trailer, searchers found more. The bones of Jack Hewitt lay scattered by a river. The remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling turned up along the road that led back toward the car. All of them had succumbed to cold and exposure. Their final acts were a desperate attempt to return, cut short by terrain and frostbite. Only one of the 5 was never found, Gary Mathias. His shoes were discovered inside the trailer, suggesting he had been there, but his body was never recovered. Gary's absence gnawed at investigators. He was a diagnosed schizophrenic, but he had been stable for years, carefully taking his medication. He had extra pills with him the night they disappeared. Those pills, like Gary himself, were never seen again. The theories pile up like snowdrifts, each one leaving as many questions as answers. Some say the men simply took a wrong turn, panicked, and wandered into the woods. But how? They were familiar with the area. One of them hated the cold. Another was terrified of the dark. Why would they abandon a perfectly working car on a freezing night to hike into waist-deep snow? Others whisper about a hitchhiker. Maybe they picked up the wrong person. Maybe something frightened them into fleeing their vehicle. But there were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds, no blood, just the slow, brutal toll of exposure. And then there are the stranger stories, told by locals who know those mountains too well. They speak of logging roads that do not appear on maps, of lights that flicker in the trees, of radios that fill with static in the middle of the night. They speak of a hum, faint and deep, like the one reported in New Mexico, threading through the forest in ways no machine should. Search teams said the radios cut out in certain stretches, their compasses wavering. To most, it was just equipment failure. To others, it felt like the woods themselves had turned hostile. The strangest detail remains the trailer. To survive for nearly 3 months, to open cans, to stack them carefully, yet never once turn the dial on the heater, never once open the locker of food. It makes no sense. Some believed they were too afraid to, as though whatever they were hiding from in those mountains was worse than cold, worse than hunger, worse than death itself. Decades later, the families still ask the same question. Why did they leave the car? It is the kind of question that keeps you awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the answer lies in something more human: fear, confusion, bad luck, or something else entirely. Something that waits off the maps, that lures the lost deeper, until they are no longer seen. And if the forest can swallow 5 young men whole, perhaps the desert once swallowed something even larger. Not a group of friends, but an entire race. A people so massive, so unnatural, that their very existence would have shattered history. Because in Nevada, in a cave filled with dust and bones, the earth once whispered a story about giants. Mystery 5. The Lovelock Cave Giants. The desert keeps its secrets in silence, but sometimes silence is louder than any scream. In the barren stretch of Nevada near the town of Lovelock, the land looks empty, lifeless, just wind, cracked stone, and endless sky. But beneath that parched surface lies a cave with walls blackened by fire, and a story older than any highway or border. For over a century, it has drawn whispers, the kind that slip through generations and refuse to die. Long before settlers arrived, the Paiute people carried a warning. They told of the Siteka, giants with pale skin and flaming red hair, towering figures who descended from the mountains to raid camps, steal food, and sometimes drag victims screaming into the night. They were not just nuisances, they were predators. For years, the Paiute fought them, until finally the tribes banded together, driving the giants into Lovelock Cave. They piled brush at the entrance and set it ablaze, trapping their enemies inside. The screams, they said, echoed for hours until silence returned. None of the giants were supposed to survive. Centuries later, in 1911, miners searching for bat guano stepped into that same cave and found something no one expected: bones. Massive bones, skeletal remains far larger than those of any ordinary man. Among them were sandals over 15 inches long, woven from fibers that had somehow endured the ages. Fragments of fabric, preserved against all odds, hinted at a culture advanced enough to weave with skill. And there was hair, thick, red, matted with time but unmistakably human in texture. Some skulls measured more than 30% larger than average, with jaws so pronounced they looked carved for intimidation. For a brief moment, the world paid attention. Newspapers ran sensational headlines about giant skeletons unearthed in Nevada. Photographs surfaced of excavation teams standing beside skulls that dwarfed human scale. The discovery seemed to confirm the Paiute legends, lending flesh and bone to what had long been dismissed as myth. And then, just as quickly, the silence returned. Artifacts and remains were shipped to institutions for study, including the Smithsonian. After that, they vanished. The narrative shifted. Experts suddenly claimed the bones were misidentified, that the red hair was the result of mineral staining, that the skulls were nothing unusual after all. When independent researchers requested access decades later, they were told nothing remained in storage. Even records that had once cataloged oversized human remains quietly disappeared from archives, erased as if they had never existed. But the desert does not erase everything. Too many witnesses, miners, museum workers, local collectors swore that they had seen the bones, held the artifacts, measured the skulls. Private collectors in Nevada still whisper of pieces hidden away, never returned to the public eye. The Nevada Historical Society itself once listed the remains of unusually large humans in its records and entry that was mysteriously deleted in the 1980s. It is as if the very act of remembering had become dangerous. The Paiute never forgot. Their stories remain as vivid as ever, told in the voices of tribal elders who insist that history is not always written on paper, but carved into memory. They say the giants screamed as the flames rose in Lovelock Cave, that some may have escaped deeper into the earth, vanishing into tunnels no one has mapped. And the Paiute are not alone. Across North America, other tribes carry eerily similar legends. The Choctaw spoke of red-haired cannibal giants. The Navajo of the Starnake people, tall and brutal. Early settlers wrote of burial mounds, with bones too large to be dismissed as human. Coincidence, or fragments of a hidden past? If the giants of Lovelock were real, the implications are devastating. It would mean that human history in North America is far stranger than textbooks allow. It would force us to ask, who decides what counts as history, and who has the power to bury it? Because if institutions like the Smithsonian did suppress evidence, whether out of fear, embarrassment, or something darker, then perhaps the silence itself is the loudest proof of all. Today, Lovelock Cave is little more than a tourist stop. A plaque tells a sanitized story, omitting the legends, the bones, the controversy. You can walk into its dark mouth, trace your fingers along its scorched walls, and feel the weight of something missing. No giants, no artifacts, only absence. And yet, if you stand still long enough, the wind through the cave sometimes carries a resonance like the low hum of a drum, as though the past still beats faintly beneath the rock. The desert buries, but it does not forget. And sometimes, what lies beneath does not sleep forever, which brings us to another silence, this one deeper, colder, hidden not in stone but in water. Because while Lovelock Cave may have concealed giants, beneath the surface of Lake Michigan, something else waits a structure that should not exist, still sending a signal into the dark. Mystery 6. The Lake Michigan Anomaly. Lakes are supposed to be familiar, tame. They are where families picnic, where fishermen cast lines, where the water laps at the shore with a rhythm you can trust. But Lake Michigan is not tame. It is vast enough to feel like an ocean, deep enough to hold secrets no sonar can fully trace, and haunted enough to have earned its own name, America's Bermuda Triangle. For decades, planes have vanished over its waters, ships have set out never to return, and radios have fallen into sudden static, as though something unseen were interfering. But in the late 20th century, the mysteries of the Michigan Triangle grew darker, because beneath its surface, buried in silence and sediment, lies something no one can fully explain. A massive, symmetrical formation that should not be there and that seems not entirely asleep. The first real glimpse came in 1987. A research vessel mapping sediment patterns scanned across the lake floor and caught something unusual, a return signal too perfect, too circular to be natural. At roughly 250 feet across, it looked less like geology and more like architecture. At first, researchers assumed it was a sunken ship, but ships do not come in flawless discs. Years later, private diving teams made the attempt. They returned shaken, pale, and unwilling to speak on camera. One diver admitted, off the record, that it looked like a stadium-sized saucer carved from stone, with ridges like steps around its rim. Another swore that when he touched the surface, he felt a vibration, not sound, but a pressure, as if the stone itself was humming. Cameras glitched. Lights failed. Radios cut to static. The deeper they pushed, the worse the interference grew, until finally they surfaced, unwilling to return. It might have been dismissed as local legend if not for what surfaced half a world away. In 2011, divers in the Baltic Sea discovered a nearly identical structure, the Baltic Sea anomaly. Same size, same shape, same grooves carved into its body like ancient markings. Within weeks, comparisons were inevitable. Satellite imaging experts noted that both anomalies were not only similar in appearance, but sat along magnetic lines in the Earth's crust, as though they had been placed there intentionally. And then came the strangest detail of all. Both anomalies emit a signal. It is not man-made. It is not geological. It pulses in low frequencies, as if alive, cycling in rhythms that suggest intention. The signal is not constant. It waits, pauses, then stirs again, like something listening for an answer. Attempts to triangulate its origin have failed. Drone submersibles sent down to investigate sometimes do not come back. And those that do return with wiped memory banks, as though whatever they touched had erased them deliberately. The theories are as wide as the lake itself. Some say it is an ancient spacecraft, buried beneath glacial ice long before humans ever walked these shores. Others whisper it is a portal, a gateway linking distant places like Michigan and the Baltic Sea, merely 2 points in a much larger network. Still others think of it as a machine, or worse, a consciousness, an intelligence that has been sleeping for millennia and is only now beginning to stir. Local fishermen tell of nights when the water glows faint blue just beneath the surface, a shimmer too wide to be headlights, too silent to be boats. Some swear they have heard the hum beneath the Matadri waves, low and resonant, vibrating through the hulls of their vessels. And every few years, another plane or ship disappears within the triangle, as though claimed by something that does not wish to be seen. Officially, of course, nothing exists. There are no government reports, no admitted investigations, no acknowledgement at all. But whispers persist of black-budget dives, of military vessels seen anchored over the anomaly with no explanation. One diver who walked away from the project left only a note. We did not find it. It let us find it. And now it knows we are here. The worst part is not the signal itself, it is the silence that follows. Because if it is listening, if it is waiting, then it means it has not forgotten, and maybe, just maybe, it is preparing to answer. And so we are left with 6 mysteries scattered across a single nation: a vanished flight, a humming mesa, a traveler from nowhere, 5 men lost to the snow, giants burned into legend, and a signal pulsing beneath the waves. Each should be impossible. Each should have been explained away, and yet each endures. Too strange to dismiss, too consistent to ignore. But these stories share one thread stronger than coincidence. They were not just forgotten, they were erased. And when a country erases something, it leaves behind not closure, but an echo. An echo that grows louder the longer we pretend it is not there. 6 stories, scattered across time and landscape, yet bound together by one thread: erasure. A plane filled with soldiers that vanished from the sky as if the Pacific swallowed it whole. A desert mesa that hums like a living thing, its door never meant to be opened. a man who carried the history of a country no one had ever drawn on a map. 5 friends who stepped out of a working car into the winter and never came back. A cave that spat out bones too big for history to allow. A structure beneath the waves, silent and massive, still sending a signal. These are not accidents. Not in the way we are told to believe. An accident leaves debris, evidence, scars on the land. What these leave instead is silence. A silence curated, sharpened, placed with care. The kind of silence that is heavy with intent. You notice it in the way families wait decades for answers that never arrive, in the way documents vanish from archives, in the way entire generations are taught that some questions are simply unimportant. Silence is the weapon of institutions. If something is never acknowledged, it can never be denied. And what cannot be denied becomes a ghost, not just haunting history, but gnawing at the edges of our reality. But silence does not erase. It echoes. It lingers in a daughter's voice when she says her father was erased. It reverberates in the scar of a man who claimed he saw things underground no human should. It trembles in the static that cuts off cameras at the exact moment they should have captured the truth. And it pulses, low and patient, from beneath the waves of a lake, as though something vast is still awake and waiting. If you step back, a pattern emerges. Sky, stone, border, forest, cave, water, different places, different times, yet always the same fracture, always the same refusal to explain, always the same trail that leads to nowhere official but everywhere unofficial. Maybe that is the point. Maybe the map we hold in our hands, the one carved by governments and textbooks and polished monuments, was never meant to show the full terrain. Maybe it is a decoy, a safer version of the world, offered so that we never go looking for the real one. And yet, we do look. Humans always do. We chase what flickers at the edge of vision. We ask why a car was abandoned when it worked, why bones disappear into archives, why a passport can exist for a place that never did. And we do not stop, because deep down we know the silence is not natural. It is built, and anything built can be broken. Perhaps that is why these mysteries endure, not because they resist explanation, but because they refuse to die. They want to be remembered, even if only as fragments. A hum under the desert, a flash in the sky, a name whispered at customs, a frozen body wrapped in sheets, a sandal too large to wear, a signal pulsing in the dark. They survive because silence is never absolute. There is always a crack. So as you turn off this video and the ordinary world presses back in, remember this: the United States is not just highways and skylines and maps that pretend to be complete. It is fractures, buried deep, that bleed through when you least expect them, and when they do, they whisper the same warning. The map you know does not show everything, and maybe it was never meant to.